In the middle of the war, while the world was burning, British intelligence pulled off something so daring it is hard to believe even today. They used a nameless body to plant a single idea inside the enemy's mind. That idea was swallowed even by the dictator himself. But what looked like a simple deception game was hiding something far deeper and darker. To make this plan work, it was not enough to mislead. They had to create a person from scratch: his identity, his debts, his love, his fears, and then convince the entire enemy front that he was real. The story you are about to hear began in a morgue, and it ended when tens of thousands of soldiers marched into battle, believing a lie written in the name of a dead man. But something in this story still raises questions. One of its creators may have known too much, and what he left behind casts doubt on the entire meaning of this so-called brilliant operation. Stay until the end. The final truth changes everything. Don't forget to like, leave a comment, and subscribe. You are not here by accident. By 1943, the Allied forces had achieved something many thought impossible. They had pushed back against the German war machine in North Africa. Victory at El Alamein had given them a foothold, a launching pad for what everyone knew must come next. But where? The question haunted every war room from London to Washington. Southern Europe lay before them like a chessboard, each possible move carrying the weight of thousands of lives. Sicily seemed obvious, perhaps too obvious. As Churchill himself remarked, anyone but a fool would know it was Sicily. And therein lay the trap. German defenses on the island had been reinforced to withstand exactly the assault everyone expected. A direct attack would become a slaughter, beaches turning red while Nazi machine guns carved through Allied ranks. The mathematics were brutal and simple. Without deception, Operation Husky would fail before it began. In the shadowy corridors of MI5, where Britain's most sensitive secrets were guarded, two unlikely figures were about to propose something that bordered on madness. Charles Chumley, barely 25, squinted through thick spectacles at documents that could reshape the war. His partner, Ewan Montague, possessed the methodical mind of a judge and the imagination of a novelist. They had been studying the Trout Memo, a document that compared wartime deception to fly fishing, authored by none other than Lieutenant Commander Ian Fleming. The analogy was elegant. Just as an angler must present the perfect lure to fool a wary trout, intelligence officers must craft deception so compelling that even the most suspicious enemy would bite. But Chumley and Montague were contemplating something far more elaborate than any fishing expedition. They wanted to create an entirely fictional person, complete with personality quirks, financial troubles, and romantic entanglements. This phantom would carry falsified military documents, suggesting the Allies planned to attack Greece, not Sicily. The vehicle for this deception? A corpse. "We'll need a body," Chumley said, his words hanging in the air like smoke from his cigarette. Someone fresh enough to fool a German pathologist, convincing enough to fool German intelligence. The audacity of it was breathtaking. They would essentially resurrect the dead, breathing life into a homeless man's remains and transforming him into a decorated Royal Marine. Every detail would need to be perfect, from the wear patterns on his uniform to the crumbs of tobacco in his pocket. One mistake, one inconsistency, and the entire deception would collapse. Worse, the Germans would know exactly where the real invasion was planned, turning Sicily into a fortress impossible to breach. Finding the right body proved more challenging than anticipated. The requirements were specific and morbid. a recently departed male of military age, unmarked by obvious injury or disease. In wartime London, death was commonplace, but the right kind of death for their purposes remained elusive. Then Coroner Bentley Purchase made contact. At St. Pancras Hospital mortuary, the remains of Glyndŵr Michael awaited them, a homeless Welsh man whose life had ended in an abandoned warehouse, apparently by his own hand through rat poison. The irony wasn't lost on either man. Here was someone society had overlooked in life, about to become the most important person in the Allied war effort. But even in death, Glyndŵr Michael presented problems. Sir Bernard Spilsbury, Britain's foremost forensic pathologist, examined the body with clinical precision. His verdict was troubling. Anyone conducting a proper autopsy would immediately recognize that this man hadn't drowned. The telltale signs were absent: no water in the lungs, no foam on the lips, no evidence of the struggle that marks a drowning victim. If they discover this body never touched seawater while alive, Spilsbury warned, your entire operation crumbles. Chumley and Montague exchanged glances. They were asking the Germans to believe not just in their fictional documents, but in their fictional death as well. It was deception layered upon deception, lies wrapped around lies. Yet they pressed forward. Time was slipping away like sand through an hourglass, and every day of delay meant stronger German fortifications in Sicily. The transformation began with a new identity. They christened their corpse Major William Martin, borrowing the name from a living officer safely stationed in America. The real Major Martin would never know his identity had been stolen by the dead. Creating William Martin's personality became an exercise in psychological archaeology. They gave him upper-middle-class Welsh origins, making him brilliant but absent-minded, the kind of man who might carelessly lose important documents. His wallet would tell the story of a life interrupted: theater ticket stubs, an angry letter about an overdrawn bank account, stamps, cigarettes, even lint. But the master stroke was Pam. Major Martin, they decided, had fallen desperately in love just 5 weeks before his apparent death. His fictional fiancée worked in a government office, possessed a vivacious personality, and wore an expensive engagement ring that had stretched Martin's finances. The love letters tucked into his wallet, written with feminine handwriting and genuine emotion, would make German intelligence agents believe they were glimpsing authentic human passion. Every detail reinforced the others. The overdraft notice explained why a major might be carrying expensive jewelry receipts. The theater stubs suggested a man trying to impress his new love. Even artificial eyelashes were pressed between the pages of love letters, creating the impression of correspondence hastily read and treasured. They were crafting not just a cover story, but an entire human existence. Someone the Germans could empathize with, relate to, believe in. The documents Major Martin would carry needed to be more than convincing. They had to be irresistible. German intelligence operated under layers of paranoia and suspicion, their agents trained to detect even the subtlest deceptions. General Sir Archibald Nye agreed to write the crucial letter himself, understanding that German analysts had likely seen his previous correspondence. Every unconscious writing habit, every turn of phrase, every formal signature would need to match their expectations perfectly. The letter he crafted was a masterpiece of misdirection. It referenced Operation Husky, the real code name for the Sicily invasion, but described it as an assault on Greece instead. A secondary operation, codenamed Brimstone, would supposedly target Sardinia. Neither operation would mention Sicily directly, but both would draw German attention away from the real target. The genius lay in what the letter didn't say as much as what it did. Military communications rarely stated objectives plainly. They dealt in implications, assumptions, coded references that insiders would understand immediately. The Germans, reading these stolen documents, would have to fill in the gaps themselves, and human nature would lead them toward the conclusions the British wanted them to reach. But carrying such sensitive documents required explanation. Why would a major be transporting material this classified? The answer lay in the informal tone of the correspondence. These weren't official military dispatches, but personal communications between high-ranking friends who happened to discuss sensitive matters. The kind of conversation that might occur between old colleagues, shared almost casually. The briefcase chained to Major Martin's wrist would complete the picture. Officers of his rank routinely carried such cases, and the chain suggested the utmost security. Everything had to appear routine enough to be believable, yet important enough to justify the elaborate precautions. Chumley wore Major Martin's uniform for 3 months, breaking in every piece of equipment until it looked authentically used. The boots showed appropriate scuff marks. The belt bore the impression of regular wear. Even the buttons had acquired the proper patina of military life. They were creating a life so detailed, so thoroughly imagined, that it became more real than many actual existences. Selecting where to deploy their deception required intimate knowledge of German intelligence networks across neutral Europe. Spain, under Franco's dictatorial rule, maintained official neutrality while harboring deep sympathies for fascism. More importantly, it hosted one of Germany's most effective spy networks. Adolf Klaus operated from Huelva as an agricultural technician, but his real work involved coordinating intelligence operations across southwestern Spain. If anyone could get crucial information to the highest levels of German command, it was Klaus. He possessed both the connections and credibility necessary to make their deception believable. The plan required precise choreography. HMS Seraph, a submarine designed for covert operations, would carry Major Martin's body from Scotland to Spanish waters. Captain Richard Jewell commanded a crew experienced in dangerous missions, men who could be trusted with secrets they didn't fully understand. But first, the body needed protection during its journey. Charles Fraser Smith, the gadget master who inspired Ian Fleming's Q character, designed a special canister, essentially the world's first underwater corpse transportation system. 6 feet 6 inches long, hermetically sealed, filled with dry ice to prevent decomposition. The canister's journey from London to Scotland reads like something from a thriller novel. Jock Horsfall, a legendary race car driver whose poor eyesight didn't prevent him from taking extraordinary risks, volunteered to transport the sealed container in his racing van. His reputation for discretion made him perfect for the assignment, even if his driving style nearly ended the mission before it reached the submarine. On April 30th, HMS Seraph approached Spanish waters under cover of darkness. German U-boats patrolled these routes regularly, making every moment dangerous. The submarine had to surface just long enough to deploy its unusual cargo before disappearing beneath the waves. At 4:30 in the morning, with fishing boats visible on the horizon, 3 crew members lifted Major Martin from his steel cocoon. After 10 days preserved in dry ice, the body entered Mediterranean waters for the final time. The current would do the rest, carrying their fictional hero toward shores where German agents waited unknowingly to receive him. Dawn was breaking when José Antonio Rey Santana's fishing nets hauled in their unexpected catch. The Spanish fishermen recognized military insignia immediately, understanding this was no ordinary drowning. The body, documents still chained securely to its wrist, made its way to the morgue in Huelva exactly as British intelligence had hoped. Dr. Eduardo Fernandez, the local pathologist, began his examination while British Vice Consul Francis Hazelden observed proceedings with carefully concealed anxiety. Hazelden knew enough about Operation Mincemeat to recognize how much depended on the next few hours. The autopsy presented exactly the problems Spilsbury had predicted. Major Martin's lungs contained fluid, but not the specific indicators of seawater drowning. A thorough examination would reveal inconsistencies that might unravel the entire deception. Hazelden made a crucial decision, insisting that the intense heat was accelerating decomposition and that further examination would be disrespectful to the deceased. Dr. Fernandez, perhaps influenced by the Catholic cross around the body's neck, agreed to limit his investigation. The death certificate listed drowning as the cause, exactly as the British had hoped. Meanwhile, Adolf Klaus had learned about the deceased British officer and the classified documents recovered with him. For a German agent operating in neutral territory, this represented a potential intelligence coup that could elevate his standing within the Abwehr network. But accessing the documents proved frustratingly difficult. Spanish naval authorities, caught between maintaining neutrality and accommodating German interests, followed official procedures that delayed Klaus's access. Each day of delay raised the risk that British recovery efforts might succeed. The British played their part perfectly, sending increasingly urgent communications about the missing documents. Their apparent desperation convinced German intelligence that the recovered papers contained genuinely valuable information. When diplomatic channels intercepted these frantic British requests, Klaus became even more determined to examine the briefcase contents. On May 5th, after nearly a week of bureaucratic maneuvering, Klaus finally gained access to the documents. The letters he photographed seemed to confirm German suspicions about Allied invasion plans. Operation Husky would target Greece, with Sardinia as a secondary objective. Sicily wasn't mentioned as anything more than a deception. The intelligence was too important for local handling. Klaus sent copies directly to Abwehr headquarters in Berlin, where analysts would determine whether this windfall deserved Hitler's personal attention. Wilhelm Canaris, head of the Abwehr, studied the documents with the paranoid scrutiny that kept him alive in Nazi Germany's treacherous political landscape. The intelligence seemed too convenient, yet too detailed to dismiss easily. Every verification he could perform suggested authenticity. The British had provided numerous small confirmations of Major Martin's existence: bank records, personal letters, theater tickets, all discoverable through German intelligence networks. The cumulative weight of evidence painted a picture of a real person with real connections to British military planning. More importantly, the strategic logic made sense. Greece offered several advantages for an Allied invasion: established resistance networks, mountainous terrain favorable to defenders once positions were secured, and German forces already stretched thin across occupied territories. The documents reached Hitler's attention through formal intelligence channels, carrying the weight of professional analysis rather than raw speculation. When the Führer made his decision, it carried the absolute authority that brooked no contradiction within the Nazi hierarchy. 90,000 German troops received orders to reinforce Greek coastal defenses. Engineering units began constructing fortifications designed to repel amphibious assault. Artillery positions were established overlooking likely landing beaches. The German war machine, famous for its efficiency, began preparing for an invasion that would never come. British codebreakers at Bletchley Park monitored German communications with growing excitement. Intercepted messages confirmed that the enemy had accepted their deception completely. References to Greek defensive preparations appeared regularly in decoded transmissions, while intelligence about Sicilian fortifications suggested only routine garrison strength. The psychological impact extended beyond mere troop deployments. German strategic planning now assumed Allied intentions that were entirely fictional. Resources allocated to Greece couldn't be used elsewhere, creating weaknesses the Allies could exploit across multiple fronts. By midsummer 1943, Operation Mincemeat had achieved something remarkable. It had convinced history's most paranoid regime to believe a lie told by a corpse. July 9, 1943. Under cover of darkness, Allied airborne forces descended on Sicily like shadows falling across moonlit landscape. Operation Husky had begun. The real invasion finally launched against defenses that German intelligence believed were merely diversionary. The contrast with German expectations was stark. Instead of the heavily fortified positions that would have greeted an assault on Greek beaches, Allied forces encountered defenses stretched thin across Sicily's extensive coastline. Many defenders were Italian troops whose enthusiasm for Mussolini's war had evaporated months earlier. Within hours, it became clear that Operation Mincemeat had succeeded beyond its creator's wildest hopes. The beaches that should have been killing fields became manageable objectives. The fortifications that might have turned invasion into massacre remained concentrated hundreds of miles away, protecting Greek shores from attacks that existed only in German imagination. 2 American and 2 British airborne divisions secured their objectives with casualties far lighter than worst-case projections. The amphibious assault, spread across 105 miles of Sicilian coastline, proceeded with mechanical efficiency. Resistance existed, but not the overwhelming defensive superiority that had terrified Allied planners. The strategic implications rippled outward immediately. With Sicily secured, the Mediterranean became an Allied lake. Supply lines that had been vulnerable to Axis interdiction now operated under friendly protection. The soft underbelly of Europe, as Churchill had termed it, lay exposed. More importantly for the broader war, German forces found themselves fighting on multiple fronts simultaneously. Troops that might have reinforced either the Eastern Front against Soviet advances or Italian positions against Allied expansion instead maintained futile vigilance along Greek coastlines. The Eastern Front consequences proved particularly significant. As German divisions remained committed to fictional threats in the Mediterranean, Soviet forces launched offensives that reclaimed vast territories. The Battle of Kursk, history's largest tank engagement, ended in decisive German defeat, partly because reserves expected to reinforce the offensive were instead digging trenches in Greece. On July 25th, Benito Mussolini was arrested by his own government. Italy's commitment to fascism collapsed with stunning speed, removing Germany's most important European ally from the war entirely. The domino effects of Operation Mincemeat were cascading through Axis strategy faster than anyone had anticipated. By September, Italy had surrendered unconditionally to Allied forces. German troops found themselves fighting a multi-front war their resources couldn't sustain indefinitely. Every division committed to one theater meant weaknesses elsewhere that Allied intelligence could identify and exploit. The psychological victory proved as important as the strategic one. Operation Mincemeat had demonstrated that even the most sophisticated intelligence apparatus could be deceived through careful planning and meticulous attention to detail. The Nazi regime's reputation for omniscience took a blow from which it never fully recovered. British intelligence began applying lessons learned from the Mincemeat operation to other deception campaigns. The success validated unconventional approaches to intelligence warfare, encouraging experiments that would have seemed impossibly risky before Major Martin proved their effectiveness. Perhaps most remarkably, the operation had required relatively minimal resources while achieving maximum impact. Two intelligence officers, working with a small support team, had redirected 90,000 enemy troops and influenced strategic planning at the highest levels of German command. The return on investment was astronomical. Chumley and Montague received honors for their contributions to Allied victory, but the true recognition came in lives saved and objectives achieved with minimal casualties. Their fictional creation had prevented the slaughter that would have resulted from a direct assault on heavily fortified Sicilian positions. In 1998, a new inscription was added to Major William Martin's gravestone in Huelva. The memorial acknowledged Glyndŵr Michael's contribution to Operation Mincemeat, recognizing that a homeless Welsh man had helped change the course of global history through his death. The inscription reads simply but powerfully, honoring someone who had been overlooked in life, but whose remains served purposes that saved thousands of Allied lives and accelerated the end of global conflict. The ghost they created had accomplished more in death than most people achieve in entire lifetimes. Through careful deception and meticulous planning, Major William Martin had become one of World War II's most effective Allied agents, despite never having lived at all. Sometimes the most powerful truths emerge from the most elaborate lies, and Operation Mincemeat proved that imagination, properly applied, could defeat even the most formidable military machine in human history.